Okay, welcome back to another video. This is a very odd video for me because it's not a workbench video, it's not a army showcase, it's more like a pre-battle report preamble. Me and my wife later tonight we're going to be shooting a battle report of our Star Wars Fleet Miniatures game called It's a Trap. It's a set of rules that we've designed ourselves. We've play tested quite a lot. We've rewritten the rules like, I don't know, 5,000 times. And we're finally comfortable at a spot where we can play the game and show it off to people. Now, the reason why we've done that is because I have Star Wars Armada, I have Full Thrust, I have a Sky Full of Ships, I have the Metaverse rules, I have lots of sci-fi rules that you can use Star Wars figures in and kind of rework the ship stats for Star Wars figures, but I played all of them, but I wasn't really comfortable with any of them. I mean, Full Thrust is a great set of rules. Don't get me wrong. All the rules in their own right are great sets of rules. But for me, I needed something either a little simpler or a little more free-flowing without so many charts. We've written our own set of rules. We've play tested it now like 8-9 times. And we've rewritten rules. Hell, in one day, we rewrote the rules 7 times in one day. Not full rewrites, just added whole sections of rules. After playtesting, we changed ship stats, we changed measurements, and all the rest. So don't mind the cat. I have my felt space mat down because I didn't want to dig out my vinyl space mat, so forgive the cat hair that's sticking to it everywhere because he just won't get off of it. Literally the second I rolled it out, he's like, yes, this is a warm mat. And he's on there. So anyway, we are going to show you tonight or tomorrow, whenever I get to upload the video, our first battle report using this set of rules. Now, this is not a commercial set of rules. I'm not trying to make any money off this. This is just something for myself, homemade, homebrew, that we enjoyed. And I thought I would show it to everybody. So if you're interested in that, stick around. Watch for the battle report coming later. But I would just instead of having the beginning of that video be like 25 minutes long explaining the rules, I thought I'd do a separate video explaining the rules, which is what this video is going to do. Anyway, the ships here, they're all small scale ships. I don't know the exact scale. Essentially what I wanted to do is I wanted to play a game where I could have a Super Star Destroyer on the table and everything else would scale to it. So the Star Wars Armada by Fantasy Flight, or was by Fantasy Flight, they had a Super Star Destroyer model that they made, which I bought and I have in its case over on the shelf. And I basically took that measurement. It's not exactly to scale, obviously, to the Star Wars Armada ships, but I took that scale, that ship, and I scaled all the other ships to it based on measurements and by eye, essentially. So all these ships are, I don't know, 1/12,000 scale, something like that. I'm not exactly sure. Some of them are not. So for instance, the CR90 is not to scale because if I did make him to scale, he'd be just a dot on the top of the peg. So I just so you can see him on the table, I made him a different size. But all the rest of them should be more or less equal to each other. So what do we have here? Here we have 2 fleets. We have a Rebel fleet and an Imperial fleet. And then over there we have transport ships. These are Star Galleons. They are troop transports or transports for the Imperial. And the scenario we're going to be playing is the Imperial player is trying to get their transports to either an evac point, to go to a hyperspace point, to go to a planet, or to defeat the rebels. So if the Imperial player gets 2 transports off the map, it's a win. And if the rebels destroy all 6 transports, it's a win for them. What we have laid out in front of us for the Rebel fleet, and I'll just zoom in here a second, just give me a second. So there, that's better. So for the Rebels, we have a Nebulon B escort frigate, a CR90 corvette, MC40 light cruiser, a Mark I assault frigate, and an MC75 star cruiser. This is a very powerful Rebel fleet. Usually it's more ragtag than that, but this is a very powerful fleet. And for the Imperials, we have 3 Tartan patrol cutters, 2 Nebulon B armored frigates, 1 Imperial strike cruiser, 1 broadside cruiser, and 1 Victory 1 Star Destroyer. On the face of it, it looks... it may not be a very even game, but it's just a scenario to try. In the rules, I went out of my way not to give the ships a points value because I didn't want a tournament-style game. So I have nothing against tournament-style games, but my best gaming experiences, my most fond memories from gaming experiences are narrative-driven. Battles that aren't even, where the player with the lesser fleet or the lesser amount of troops or ships has to do something, and it doesn't have to be a fair fight. And, you could assign points to these ships if you really wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. I'd rather a narrative-driven game. So we just pull ships out. This seems to work. This doesn't seem to work. And we move on. Because the Imperials don't have to worry about killing the rebels, they just have to worry about getting their transports off the table edge. It doesn't really matter if the fleets are even. So this is what we have. The 2 fleets, I've explained it to you. The rules are an initiative-driven rule set. Both players rolls a dice. Whoever wins the dice roll, they must go first. And it's an alternate activation. So if the rebel player wins initiative, they designate 1 ship to move. It activates, does all of its things, its turns, its movements, its firing. And then the Imperial player does the same thing with one of their ships. And then you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until all the ships have activated. And then we get into what I call the fighter phase, where basically fighters and bombers zoom around the map and do their thing. Now, the Imperial fleet is, it's 13 ships versus the Rebel fleet with 5 ships. But the 6 of the Imperial ships don't really have an attack value. They do have one attack value, but it's not very they're not very powerful. So the rebels will have their work cut out to bypassing the Imperial defenses and getting to the convoy to begin with. But what the rebels do have in their favor is they have a distinct fighter advantage, which makes sense given the Star Wars world. The Imperials have TIE fighters, and the rebels have X-Wings and A-Wings and B-Wings and that kind of thing. So because this is mainly a capital ship v capital ship game, fighters and bombers are not a main player in the game, but they do have value. And I'm going to go through the fighter section now, so I don't have to explain it later. Essentially what you do is you get your ships, and we have written out a record sheet of all the ships. So on the left-hand side here, you see all the ships. You start off with Acclamator, Architens. I know that's spelled wrong, but we've changed that in the most recent one. And you have what we call their scale value, meaning how big they are. So for instance here, Gazanti is a scale 1, which means it's tiny. And then where do you have it here? A Bellator is a scale 6, which means it's huge. And then you can get up to scale 7, which is massive, like a Death Star type thing. You have their speed values, you have their turning radius. The 1-45 means that they can make one 45-degree turn in their movement. You have their front gun, so they've got 4 dice attacking front, 4 dice attacking port, starboard, and 1 in the rear arc. This is their shield save, so you see a Dreadnought Heavy Cruiser has a 5+ shields, and he's got a 4+ armor value. And then he's got 5 hull points. And then here he has point defense, so this is against fighters. And then what we have here, which is what we're going to get into, we have fighter cap capacity, or what we call fighter capacity, and bomber capacity. That's how many squadrons, you could say, or the value of the squadrons to the fleet are inside the hangar of that ship. So some ships, for instance, you'll see the Acclamator here, it doesn't have any fighter or bomber capacity. That doesn't mean that in the Star Wars lore that they couldn't or that they didn't. That just means in this game, this is a transport for transporting troops. So it does have some guns, decent shields and hull, some decent fighter capacity, anti-fighter capacity, but it doesn't have any fighters itself. And then you'll see, if you go down here, you'll see 10. So the Bellator class battlecruiser can have 10 squadrons of fighters and 6 squadrons of bombers. So essentially what you do is once you've chosen your ships, you add up combined, and you add up and combine the total fighter capacity of the fleet and the bomber capacity of the fleet. And then what you do is you use those totals as a kind of currency to purchase squadrons. So I'm going to do that here, and I'm going to pause the video and rearrange the fleet so it's easier to see, and we're going to go through that step in just a moment. Okay, so I've rearranged the ships. Rebel ships are at the front, Imperials at the back. You can tell that already by the Star Destroyer, and they're going from largest down to smallest. So MC-75 down to the Corellian Corvette. Now, in the stat lines of the ships, all of the ships have an individual fighter capacity. Some of them have 0. So, for instance, the Tartan patrol cruisers have 0 of either. So they don't. Although they could probably, maybe there's a hangar bay in there where they can have a shuttle or a few fighters. To the overall fleet, like the general size of a massive fleet, they're not bringing anything to the table that the fleet can use in terms of fighters or bombers. Not to say that they don't have any, it's just in the overall sense, they don't add much. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do this separately. I'm going to show you the currency, how you spend, or how you build up your currency to spend on fighters and bombers. And the MC-75, in its stat line, now sorry for this, they're in alphabetical order. So the MC-75 Star Cruiser, it has a cap for fighters of 4 and bombers of 2. So what I'm going to do is, just to show you, to make it easier, I'm going to use this green dice for fighters. So he has 4 fighters, and I'm going to use this orange dice to designate bombers. So 4 fighters and 2 bombers. I know the glare is there. Maybe I can turn that down. Hold on a sec. Well, it's a little better. But anyway, MC-75, 4 and 2. The Mark I assault frigate, they give the rebels a 2 for fighter capacity and a 2 for, where's the 2? A 2 for bomber. So they're a very even ship. 2 and 2. Now the, let's see. Anyway, start with the glare. The MC-40, it is the same. It has 2 and 2. So it gives 2 bombers and 2 fighters to the overall fleet cap. The CR-90 gives nothing. They don't have any capacity. And the Nebulon B, if I check my chart here, he gives you 1 fighter capacity. So there you go. The Imperials, on the other hand, I'm going to use 2 different colored dice for this as well. The red will be fighters and the green will be bombers. So the Victory class Star Destroyer, it gives 2 fighter capacity to the Imperial fleet and 2 bomber capacity. The Broadside Cruiser gives 2 as well, so 2 fighters and also 2 bombers. The Strike Cruiser, I gotta check my record sheet here. Strike Cruiser, 2 and 1. So 2 fighters and 1 bomber. So there we go. The Nebulon armored frigates, the 2 of them that they have there, they actually give 0. So none of the remaining Imperial ships give anything towards the currency of the fighters, or the fighter bomber cap into the game. So they're disregarded. Essentially, because it is, if you can see it here, it is the armored version. Maybe bring it a little closer. It is the armored version of the Nebulon B. It doesn't actually, it forgoes that hangar bay in this game for more armor. So there you go. So now all we do is we just add up the totals of each. So we add up the fighters. There's 4, 6, 8, 9. So essentially we're going to give ourselves 9 fighters and 6 bombers. You can see there's 3 2s. So the Rebel fighter cap is 9 and the Rebel bomber cap is 6. Now for the Imperials, it's 6 fighters and 5 bombers. I'll just get rid of these just to show you. And there we go. That is the spending points for the fleet. Now I'm just going to go pause here for a second and show you how you spend these points. Okay, we'll be back in a second. Okay, so what I've done is I've laid out the squadrons available here. Now you'll notice these are Star Wars Armada fighter tokens, which work great actually for this game, to be honest. I don't need to 3D print or anything. They have all the fighters that I could use and bombers that I could use, and they have cool flight stands, and they have damage markers, which is important in this game. But yeah, let's just want to change him up to his actual damage value. Sorry. Oh, actually, no, it's a 2. Sorry, my bad. So here we have laid out the types of fighters and bombers. I'm really sorry about that glare. I'm not sure which side of the table it's coming from, but essentially what we have is we have a Z95 Headhunter, an A-Wing, X-Wing, or sorry, Z95, Y-Wing, X-Wing, A-Wing, B-Wing, and E-Wing. Now there is a K-Wing, but I don't have a model for that. But there is the rules are there for it. And you can add whatever you want to it as well. It's a very flexible system of coming up with stuff. But essentially what I have the fighter stands laid out here, and I have the white dice designate the points cost for assigning a squadron of each of these types of flights. So as the rebels up there, we have 9 points to spend on fighters and 6 on bombers. So now this is where the player gets to choose what kind of squadrons they want. Did they want the elite types of fighters and bombers, like the E-Wing and B-Wing? Or do they want like the middle ground, like the X-Wing, A-Wing, and Y-Wing, the standard fare? Or do they want the cheapest chips, Z95? So with 9 points to spend on fighters, I could buy 9 squadrons of Z95s and just flood the board with Z95s and have a great time. The downside is that they only have 1 hit point each, and they have 0 bomb capacity. So they can only fight other fighters or bombers. They cannot attack capital ships. And the main part of this mission is taking out as many transports as I can in the shortest amount of time. So they might not be the best choice. Now, Y-Wings, they're 2 points each. Now, they still only have 1 hit point each, but they have a bombing capacity, so they can physically damage Star Destroyers and whatnot. So they're 2 points, but they're fairly slow. The X-Wing is kind of like your middle ground. Still 2 points, but he's got 2 hull points for that extra for that cost. But he's only got half the bomb capacity of a Y-Wing. So you choose... X-Wings are good in dogfights, and they're okay in bombing, whereas Y-Wings are okay in dogfights, but good in bombing. So you have the half a dozen of one, 6 of the other. A-Wing is very much like an X-Wing, still 2 points, but it's only got 1 hull point. But it's super fast, can reach almost the whole board, and it has superior dogfighting capability. The B-Wing is kind of like the middle ground heavy fighter bomber. It has 3 bombing capacity, so 1 more than the Y-Wing, and it's got some fairly decent dogfighting, but it's not very maneuverable or fast. And then you have the E-Wing, which is almost the polar opposite of the B-Wing. Superior dogfighting, capable at dogfighting. So essentially what you can see is you can change any rules you want, but for us, essentially, you spend these points. So for me, the rebel player, I need to spend money on as much bombing power as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 3 points on Z95. So I'm going to buy 3 Z95s. So that's going to cost me 3, leaving me with 6 fighter points. And then I'm going to buy 3 X-Wings. And they're each 2 points each. So 3 times 2 is 6. So there. So I'm going to choose X-Wings and Z95s. No, that's another X-Wing. Sorry. Z95s. Here we go. 3 Z95s and 3 X-Wings. So now my bomber capacity. So these are 2 points. These are 3 points. I could choose 2 B-Wing squadrons or 3 Y-Wing squadrons. And 6 points. I could either choose 2 Y-Wings and an A-Wing, or 2 E-Wings, or an E-Wing and a B-Wing. You see what I'm saying? This is how you spend your currency. But for the job, I want as many bombers as possible, so I'm going to choose 3 Y-Wings. And then we just take these away. These no longer matter to the game. We've spent our currency. So just give me a second and I'll set this up and we'll get on to the Imperials. Okay, here's the setup. The rebel player now has 3 Y-Wing squadrons, 3 X-Wing squadrons, and 3 Z95s. And that is what they're going to use for the entire game. So from the beginning of the first turn to the end of the last turn, this is what you have on the table. I made sure to set, and I don't worry about these. Like this here shows like a different type of ship than the Z95. But all I care about in this game is the damage track. Now Z95s, you make sure you just set the damage track. So Z95s have 1 damage each. So once they take a hit, they're gone. The Y-Wings also have 1 damage each, and the X-Wings have 2. So as long as you've set the game, the fighter stands up to the proper amount of hit points, you're good to go. So there we have it. That is the Rebel fleet. We're going to show you here Rebel fleet. You got the MC-75, the Mark I frigate, the MC-40, Nebulon B, and the Corvette, and then you got your 9 squadrons of fighters and bombers. And now we're going to move on to the Imperials. Okay, back in a sec. Okay, here we have the lineup for the Imperials. You see the bog standard TIE Fighter, TIE Bomber, TIE Interceptor, TIE Advanced, can't remember what that one's called, and then the awesome TIE Defender. And at the bottom you can see their points, their cost. 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 4. Essentially what the Imperial player does now is just repeats the process the Rebel player just did. They have their 6 points that they can spend on fighters, the 5 points they can spend on bombers, and they buy squadrons. Now, the Rebels have a lot of squadrons. They have 9. The Imperials don't have the ability to maybe get up to 9, but they can make it close. They could, with 6 points of fighters, they could buy 6 TIE squadrons. And that might actually not be a bad idea. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy 4 squadrons of TIE fighters. So just make that 4. And that'll give me 2 points left. And then I might buy either an advance or an interceptor. So the difference between the advance and the interceptor is the advance has the same speed as a TIE fighter, but whereas a TIE fighter has no bombing capability, the advanced does. It can attack, it has 1 attack against capital ships. So it's basically like a sort of like an X-Wing. But it's very similar to a TIE fighter. Whereas the TIE Advanced, it doesn't have any bombing capability, but it's extremely fast. And I could use the speed to get up to Rebel bombers quickly, or I could, you know what? I'm not trying to destroy Rebel capital ships. I'm trying to escape. So I think I'm going to choose the TIE Interceptor for 2 points. So there we go. That's spending that, and I'm going to have an Interceptor squadron. Now, going to have one of those. Now for the bombing capacity, the Imperials don't have a lot of options when it comes to the bombing capacity. They can choose TIE bombers or a hybrid TIE Defender. So a TIE Defender is 4 points. So that would use up almost my entire bombing capacity and leave me with nothing left over to buy, because TIE bombers are 2 points, they're 4 points. So what I will do, I will buy 2 TIE bombers for 4 points, leaving me with a single one. Now you'll notice there's no single point TIE bomber available. So in a case like that, one of your TIE bombers, you just move him up from 2 hull points to 3, and you've spent your remaining point. So there we go. We've spent all of them, and I'll just get them out here right now. So we'll move these guys out of the way so they're not distracting us. And we are going to have a single TIE Interceptor. We're going to have 4 TIE Fighters. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll get another one. A 4th TIE Fighter. And we're going to get 2 TIE Bombers. One has 2 hull points, so let's make sure that says 2. And one will have the 3. And that is our 5 points of bombers. And that's it. That is the Imperial squadrons. So it's going to be 9 Rebel squadrons against, what's that, 5, 6, 7 Imperials. So just give me a second. I'll be right back. I'm just going to put them with the fleet. And this video is coming to a quick end. Okay, and there we go. There we have the Rebel fleet and the Imperial fleet in the background there. Now, why the fighter stands are touching the bases of the capital ships is in this game, the fighters and bombers have to start off. They must start off in base-to-base contact with a ship with relevant capacity. So for instance, the MC-80 has a 2 and 2, so 2 bombers, 2 fighters. So it can have a bomber and a fighter next to it, like coming from it. Whereas the Nebulan B, it doesn't have any bomber capacity, so it can only have a fighter attached to it. And because it only has a value of 1, it can only have 1 fighter squadron attached to it. So you have to spread out the ships as best as possible. And the reason why that's important, that I'll show you in the beginning of the battle report, is when the rebel ships they hyperspace onto the board, it might become important who pops out of the ship first. So for instance, if all your bombers are in, let's say if your 4 bombers are in the MC, or if 2 of your bombers are in the MC 40, and on the Imperial turn they manage to blow it out of the sky, well, you've lost your bombers. So it'll be important how they deploy at the beginning of the table. Now, before I close off, I will just like to include what's happening with the transports. Now, in this rule set, some ships are meant to destroy other ships. So, for instance, a Super Star Destroyer or an Imperial Star Destroyer, they're designed primarily to destroy other capital ships. While other ships in the game are meant to add a fighter, bomber, point defense capacity. So, for instance, if you know your lore in Star Wars, a Lancer frigate is mainly a gunboat for taking down fighters and bombers. So it's kind of like an escort ship. It escorts the bigger ships around. So the bigger ships like the Star Destroyers that might lack anti-fighter or anti-bomber ability, you stick a Lancer frigate up next to it and it'll help out. So these Tartan patrol cutters, they are very much the same. You can use them, the Imperial player can choose to use them as individual ships, like actual ships like any other ship, or he can use their trait. Every ship has a kind of a trait, and their trait is point defense support ship. And what that means is you can sacrifice their autonomy, you can sacrifice their ability to be on their own, and you can assign them to escort any friendly ship in your fleet. And when that happens, their point defense value is doubled, so they're twice as good at shooting down fighters and bombers as they would be, but they no longer are an independent unit until the escorting ship is destroyed. Now, if the escorting ship is destroyed, they can go on their own and they can make their own course changes and whatever. But until then, they basically follow side by side the ship that they're escorting. But they cannot shoot any other enemy ships, and all they can do is add their point defense value to the escorted ship. And that's a pretty cool ability. It's a cool way of maybe if you have a very valuable ship that you want to protect from rebel bombers and fighters, because the rebels usually will have a very, they'll usually have a big advantage in fighters and bombers. Their X-Wings, you've seen the movies, their X-Wings and Y-Wings and B-Wings can take out Imperial capital ships with ease, it seems. Stick a few of these Tartan cruisers, or what they call it, patrol cutters, next to a Star Destroyer, and all of a sudden those fighters and bombers probably aren't getting through quite as easily. So in this game, what we're going to do is we have 3 Tartans, and we're going to assign these Tartans to 3 of these transports. And you'll see that when we set up the game. You just put them in base to base, and now even though the Tartan patrol cutter can go 12 inches, he's stuck going the speed of the slowest ship, which is 6 inches on this guy. But defending 3 of these transport ships will really help the Imperial player maybe get them off the board and win the game for them. So it's a big deal. Anyway, I'm just going to stop. Let me know what you think. If you want me to keep going or showing more of the rules off. Again, it's a homebrew set of rules that me and my wife have made over a little while. And we're currently about to send it out for playtesting with other players, but we've played it several times and we enjoy it. But it's also always good to know what other people think. Again, it's a whole set of rules that we've made. We've made stats for almost every ship I can think of in the Star Wars universe. We've got all our to-hit charts and whatever sitting here. Essentially how it works is you check your range, and these are your range bands and your hit modifiers. You have your movement, so how fast the target ship is moving and how fast how big or small the target ship is. So for instance, if you're shooting at a Death Star, you get a +3 to your dice, because really, how are you going to miss? But if you're shooting at a Corvette, like a tiny Corvette, you get a -2 to your dice, and if it's going 14 inches or more, which it can, you get a -1. So you can see it's a little harder for a Star Destroyer to hit a Corvette. And that's how it works. we're going to play a battle report maybe later today, and I'll update you with another video. Okay, thanks for watching and appreciate your time. Bye for now.